When an avoidant loses you, something interesting happens. It doesn't hit them at 3 p.m. in the middle of their busy day. It hits them at 3 a.m. That's when the distractions are gone, when there's no one left to text, when the silence becomes deafening. And in that silence, they begin to remember not the arguments, not the parts of commitment that scared them. No, they remember the way you laughed at their jokes, even when they weren't funny. They remember the comfort of knowing someone had their back, even when they pushed you away. Avoidants often pride themselves on being self-sufficient. They'll convince themselves that they don't need anyone. But here's the truth: you don't realize the value of connection until it's absent. And absence has a cruel way of magnifying love. At 3 a.m., they don't think about their freedom. They think about your absence. And that's when the haunting begins. When someone with avoidant tendencies loses you, the impact rarely shows up right away. On the surface, they may even seem fine, almost unaffected. They'll carry on with their routines, immerse themselves in work, distract themselves with hobbies, or spend time with casual connections that don't require much from them emotionally. To the outside world, it might even look like they've moved on quickly. But that's an illusion. What's really happening is that their defense mechanisms are still running the show. They've spent years training themselves to push away discomfort, to compartmentalize, to tell themselves they don't need anyone. So in the beginning, they lean heavily on those habits. But avoidance has a time limit. Distractions eventually run dry, and the noise of daily life fades, especially late at night. At 3 a.m., when the world is quiet and there's nowhere to hide, the truth begins to surface. That's when the loss finally hits, not as a sharp, immediate blow, but as a creeping realization that grows heavier the more they sit in silence. Suddenly, the very thing they tried so hard to escape, emotional closeness, becomes the thing their mind can't stop replaying. It doesn't come in the form of big memories at first. It's not always the grand trips or the milestones. It's the small details that haunt them. The way you used to reach for their hand without saying a word. The way you laughed at something ridiculous on TV and leaned on their shoulder. The sound of your voice when you told them good night. These fragments start to feel louder than the silence around them, and they realize those moments were anchoring them in ways they never admitted when you were still there. At 3 a.m., there's no one else to impress, no audience to maintain their independence for. It's just them and the empty space where your presence used to be. And it's in that space that regret begins to grow. They wonder why they didn't try harder, why they dismissed the importance of connection, why they convinced themselves they were fine without it. They remember the times you reached out with patience and they pushed you away, believing they had endless chances to let you back in. That false sense of security shatters in the middle of the night when they realize that this time you're not coming back. The irony is that during the day, they may still cling to the narrative that they're okay. They'll function, they'll distract, they'll even convince others, and sometimes themselves, that they're moving on. But when the world goes quiet, they can't outrun the truth. The loss doesn't crash into them all at once, but it drips in steadily, wearing them down each night a little more. That's why the pain feels delayed. It doesn't announce itself in the heat of the breakup. It sneaks in slowly, choosing the quietest hours to remind them of what they've lost. When the memories begin to creep in for someone avoidant, what rises to the surface is rarely the arguments, the tension, or the times things went wrong. Those moments existed, of course, but they don't linger in the same way. What sticks, what refuses to let go of their mind, are the subtle, tender details of the connection they once had and no longer do. It's the way you used to laugh at their half, form jokes, the ones that weren't even particularly clever, but your laughter made them feel lighter, funnier, more important. They remember how you made ordinary moments feel extraordinary, how sitting on the couch together in silence somehow felt more grounding than being in a crowded room with anyone else. An avoidant doesn't usually allow themselves to lean fully into intimacy while they're in it. They may keep a protective distance, thinking it keeps them safe, thinking it shields them from vulnerability. But once the relationship is gone, those very moments of intimacy, small gestures, quiet reassurances, the soft rhythm of daily companionship become the loudest reminders of what they no longer have. The things they once brushed off as unimportant suddenly carry immense weight. They might not remember the details of an argument, but they remember the feeling of your head on their chest as you both drifted off to sleep. They might not hold onto the tension of difficult conversations, but they replay the tone of your voice when you told them you believed in them, especially in moments when they doubted themselves. It's a cruel trick of the mind. The very closeness they resisted becomes the very thing they long for in its absence. They don't think about the moments where they felt overwhelmed by the idea of commitment. Instead, they recall how your presence made even their restless, unsettled spirit feel calmer. They remember how you supported them without demanding that they be someone they weren't, how you gave them space yet still managed to make them feel chosen. These are the things that haunt them. Not the friction, but the comfort. Not the fights, but the intimacy that their walls never truly erased. And the reason these softer memories linger is because they reveal the contrast between what they thought they wanted and what they actually needed. At the time, they may have told themselves they were protecting their freedom, holding on to independence, refusing to lose themselves in someone else. But what they come to realize in the quiet aftermath is that those small moments of connection were not threats. They were lifelines. The very memories they now miss most are proof that being close to someone didn't weaken them. It made them stronger, more seen, more understood. So, in the stillness of the night, when they sift through their memories, the arguments blur into the background. What remains sharp, vivid, and undeniable are the ways you made them feel cared for in the smallest, simplest ways. And it's those details, the ones they overlooked while they had them, that echo loudest once you're gone. For someone who has always prided themselves on being independent, the idea of relying on another person can feel suffocating. They tell themselves they don't need anyone, that they're better off standing alone. That closeness is a burden rather than a blessing. Independence becomes part of their identity, something they wear like armor to protect themselves from disappointment or rejection. And for a while, it works. They can convince themselves that solitude is strength, that not needing anyone makes them untouchable. But when they lose the person who brought warmth into their independence, they begin to feel a subtle shift they can't ignore. At first, they may lean even harder into self-sufficiency. They throw themselves into work, fill their schedules, or distract themselves with surface-level connections that don't demand vulnerability. To the outside world, it can look like they're thriving, as if losing someone who loved them hasn't even made a dent. But when the noise of the day quiets, a different reality reveals itself. What once felt like freedom now feels like emptiness. What once felt like strength now feels like loneliness. Independence without love, without the grounding presence of someone who truly knows them, starts to lose its shine. The truth is, independence is only fulfilling when it's balanced with connection. Being able to stand on your own has value, but it doesn't replace the human need for closeness, for being seen, for sharing life with someone else. When they had you, their independence was enriched by the comfort of knowing you were there. They could go off and do their own thing, knowing they had a safe place to return to. But once that's gone, the freedom they were so determined to protect feels hollow. There's no one to celebrate the wins with, no one to share the quiet moments with, no one to witness the version of themselves they didn't show the rest of the world. And that's when the contrast becomes unbearable. They realize that independence isn't the same as fulfillment. They may have control over their time and their space, but they no longer have the intimacy that made those things meaningful. The silence after a long day, which once felt restful, now feels oppressive. The weekends that once seemed like opportunities for self-indulgence now stretch out as reminders of absence. The independence they clung to as their greatest strength begins to reveal itself as a mask, one that hid their fear of vulnerability, but also robbed them of the very connection they now crave. The realization doesn't come all at once. It sneaks in during the quiet moments, in the middle of an achievement they suddenly wish they could share, or in the ordinary routine of a day that feels strangely incomplete. Slowly, they begin to see that what they once dismissed as a burden, love, closeness, reliance on another, was actually the thing that made their life richer. And the independence they clung to, without that balance, feels like a lonely kind of prison. When the weight of absence starts to press on someone who has avoided closeness, guilt begins to creep in, and with it, regret. At first, they may try to ignore it, telling themselves they did what they had to do, that pulling back was necessary, that the relationship would never have worked anyway. But the mind has a way of replaying moments when silence surrounds them. They remember the times you reached out with patience, offering connection when they felt overwhelmed. They remember how you gave them chance after chance to meet you halfway. And then they remember how often they turned away, how often they dismissed your needs as too much, too demanding, or too inconvenient. In those late night hours, the guilt grows sharper. They start to realize that your patience wasn't endless, that you were offering them something precious, time, energy, love that you could have given to someone else, but chose to give to them. Instead of valuing it, they took it for granted. They thought you would always be there, waiting for them to figure things out, forgiving their distance, accepting their excuses. That false sense of permanence becomes the very source of their regret once they see it was never guaranteed. Regret doesn't come in a single moment, it comes in waves. Sometimes it's triggered by a memory, like the image of you smiling at them when they didn't deserve it. Sometimes it's a pang of recognition when they realize they failed to show up in ways that mattered most. They remember times when you were vulnerable, when you needed reassurance, and they held back instead of stepping forward. They remember when they could have chosen kindness and instead chose distance. They remember when they had the opportunity to close the gap between you, but chose the safety of their walls instead. The haunting part is knowing those moments can't be undone. They can't send a message into the past to change how they reacted. They can't erase the times you felt unseen or unsupported. All they're left with is the awareness that they had the chance to be better, to love more openly, to give what you were asking for, and they didn't take it. That knowledge lingers, pressing on them in quiet moments, making the nights heavier and the silence sharper. And it isn't just guilt about how they treated you, it's also the realization of what that treatment cost them. By not showing up for you, they lost the one person who saw through their walls, who stayed long enough to try to reach them. The regret isn't abstract, it has a face, your face, the one they see in their mind when they lie awake at 3 a.m. They aren't haunted by the loss of a vague idea of love. They're haunted by the fact that they let go of something real, something rare, something they might never find again, simply because they couldn't bring themselves to risk vulnerability when it mattered most. What an avoidant often doesn't realize until it's too late is that the very thing they spent so much energy avoiding becomes the very thing they ache for once it's gone. Vulnerability, closeness, intimacy. Those words may have felt threatening when they were in the relationship. They might have felt like demands, like cages closing in on their independence. Every time you tried to get closer, they instinctively pulled away, convinced that protecting their space meant protecting themselves. But when you finally leave, when the presence of your love is no longer there to reach for, the irony sets in. The connection they once feared now becomes the one thing they can't stop craving. In the quiet of the night, this truth becomes undeniable. They think about the moments when you looked at them and really saw them, their flaws, their insecurities, their defenses, and chose to stay anyway. That kind of acceptance is rare, and once it's lost, it's not easily replaced. They remember how it felt to have someone who wanted to know their inner world, someone who wasn't content with just skimming the surface. At the time, that depth scared them. Now, it's the depth they yearn for most. They begin to realize that vulnerability was never the weakness they believed it to be. It was the doorway to being loved fully, the bridge that allowed someone to care for them in the places they had hidden from everyone else. Avoiding that doorway might have felt safer in the moment, but it left them standing outside of the very connection their soul now aches for. The warmth of being understood, the safety of being accepted, the relief of not having to carry everything alone. Those are the things that play over and over in their mind once you're gone. The haunting part is that they know they had it. They know they were offered that intimacy, that openness, and they turned away. The same walls they built to protect themselves became the reason they lost the love they now crave. That realization cuts deep because it shows them that their greatest fear, being left, being unloved, being alone, was brought about not by you, but by their own avoidance. The fear they thought they were outrunning has caught up with them, and it's staring them in the face at 3 a.m. Now, what they long for isn't just your presence, but the feeling of being known, of being close, of being safe in someone's arms without having to pretend. The irony is sharp and unrelenting. The closeness they resisted has transformed into the ghost that follows them through the night. They can't escape it because deep down, they know it was never the vulnerability itself that was the enemy. It was their fear of it. And by letting that fear dictate their choices, they lost the very thing they now crave with an H they can't quiet no matter how hard they try. And so the truth about the avoidant heart is this: the very walls they build to keep love out eventually become the prison that keeps regret in. At 3 a.m., when the silence strips away distractions, they don't remember why they ran. They remember who they lost. They don't replay the conflicts, they replay the warmth. They don't celebrate their independence, they mourn the absence of connection. And in those moments, regret becomes a teacher, reminding them that love cannot be postponed, intimacy cannot be endlessly avoided, and the chance to truly show up for someone does not last forever. The haunting isn't punishment, it's awareness. Awareness of what they could have had if they had chosen courage over fear, openness over withdrawal, love over avoidance. And while they sit with that awareness, you, the one who gave them patience, laughter, and love, have the opportunity to walk forward lighter, freer, stronger. Because you know something they're only just learning: that love is meant to be embraced, not feared, valued, not taken for granted. So let them have their 3 a.m. thoughts. Let them replay what they lost. Because while they're stuck in the echoes of what was, you're moving toward the beauty of what's next. Thank you for giving your time, your attention, and your heart to this message. My hope is that it not only shed light on the patterns of avoidance, but also reminded you of your own worth, the value you bring into someone's life, and the truth that losing you is not a small thing. To anyone listening who has ever felt unseen, unappreciated, or taken for granted, may you carry forward with the certainty that your love is not a burden, it's a gift. And to those who recognize parts of themselves in these words, may you find the courage to break down the walls before they cost you something irreplaceable. Thank you for being here, for sharing this space, and for reflecting with me. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of your hearts.